Hello, welcome to Romero Threads on YouTube, where it's all about embroidery. In today's video, I'm going to break down step by step everything you have to know about completing a successful embroidery patch project. I do have multiple videos on this channel all about patch projects. I have a 10-minute, a 30-minute, a 2-hour video. Okay, but my goal in this video is to kind of bring all that information into one place and put it all in one simple lesson. Now, patches for me, one of my favorite projects, okay, one of the all-time most popular projects when it comes to embroidery. Patches can be very fun and also they can be very profitable, and that all depends on your planning and your preparation. And in today's video, we are going to go over 5 decisions you have to make when starting an embroidery patch project. And those 5 decisions, those are all depending on the final look of your patch. How do you want your patch to finally look? And what kind of external equipment do you have besides your embroidery machine? So of course, this is always a #1 question that we get, okay? What is the best way to make patches? What is the easiest? What is the most cost effective? Okay, so all that depends on these 5 decisions you have to come up with. And of course, there is no right or wrong answers. It all depends what resources you have, what materials you have, and what equipment you have. All right, so let's start with decision #1 that you have to make when creating patches. And that is based off your design. So what is the size, what is the shape, and what is the stitch coverage of your patch? All right, so let's talk about that. Okay, these shapes here, they represent a design. So anything could be made into a patch. What makes it a patch is that it has a border. Okay, so decision #1, okay, so I labeled it here. We are looking at our design. We are looking at the size of our design, our shape, and our stitch coverage. All right, so let's talk about that first. So let's talk about size first, okay? Of course, we have to know how big is our design size. You definitely want to know how big is your patch going to be, right? That's everything revolves around how big your patch is going to be. So of course you can have all different types of shape. You could have a standard square shape, or you can have a odd shape, right? You could have something going all over the place, all right? Or you could have a nice circular rounded one. Of course, these two here on the sides, these are your traditional type patches, okay? You have your rectangular or your circular, okay? But of course we have our one in the middle, okay? This is always the oddball ones. Still a possibility, okay? We can make it any shape. As long as something is a closed shape, you can make anything into a patch. You can make it into any shape. We can make it into any size. All right, so of course, right now, decision #1, we got to come up with what is your size, okay? So all these decisions that we make, it plays a big role also when it comes for pricing, okay? So all this information that we're gathering right now, we're going to use all that information at the very end. Okay, so of course, right, our shape plays a big role. So if we have the traditional shapes, of course, at the very end, when it's time to cut or it's time to finish our patch, it's a little bit easier, okay, than it is a variable shape. I call it a variable because it could be any shape. Anything your brain could think of, okay, of course we could turn it into a patch. All right, so we got our size, we have our shape. These are all decisions we got to come up with, right? And if we're dealing with a customer, this is all information we're asking a customer to give us. Now let's talk about the third item under design. This one here is very important, and this is the stitch coverage. How much stitches are we going to put on our patches? So really we have 3 categories, okay? You could break these stitch coverage into 3 categories. Okay, so what I'm talking about here, at 25%, we're doing something very simple, okay? Very simple, basic type patch where maybe we're just putting text, okay? Maybe 25% is either text or a very light logo. Okay, something like text, something very basic and easy. Okay, we're here at the 25% mark. Okay, now when we come here to the 50 through 75, okay, now we're putting more stitches onto our patches. All right, so we're adding more details, right? Now you might have a logo with text. Now you have more information on your patch. Now we're adding more information, logo, a text, okay? And now it's getting more stitches as we move more along here. Okay, and now finally we get here to the 100%, 125%, right? Because we're putting a fill stitch. So here at this category, we're going to fill our whole patch with stitches, okay? And sometimes we're going to have overlap, so that's why we go above the 100%. Okay, so here, right, this is all, we're putting stitches all over, right? So let's say we're putting a fill stitch here. Okay, so we got a fill stitch covering our whole patch. Okay, so this plays a big role here, knowing your stitch coverage, because of course time is money and you have to price accordingly, right? So of course something in this category, we can charge a whole lot less if we're here at the 25% mark. Here at our shop, we try to stay here in this area here. If you are making these patches here, you got to price accordingly, right? Because now it takes a whole lot longer, all right, to be in this area versus this area here. Of course, the size, the shape, and the stitch coverage, okay? That's the first thing we want to know. This is gonna kind of lead us to the next decisions that we have to make. But your customer has to know this. Of course, the bigger your size gets, right, the more stitches you have, the more expensive it gets, okay? The more variable, okay, the more complicated your shape is, okay, that means it's gonna take you a lot longer to complete it at the very end, okay? So of course, price goes up here. So of course, a number one question that we get is, how do I create inexpensive patches? That is decision number one, is the design. When we're talking about stitch coverage, you can also include the number of colors, okay, number of cuts, those small details when we're talking about our design, all right? So that all falls under the design area. Okay, let's move on to decision number two. All right, let's go with decision number two when creating a patch project. And that is, what kind of border do you want? So on this decision, this is what really separates all the different types of patches, okay? Because the border, right, that is the part that the customer holds, right? So when you're holding a patch, you're holding the border. You have so many different options to do and different methods to create this border, okay? But if you have an embroidery machine, if that's all you're working with, then you really only have a couple options, okay? So let's first talk about our most basic options that we have with our embroidery machine. The most popular one with an embroidery machine, that is just your regular sand stitch. I have an example of just a basic satin stitch. This is kind of what we go. This is the route that we go with. I like to keep it very basic, okay? Keep stitch count low. It gives it a nice bold look, okay? Very basic sand stitch. I like to keep it at least 4 millimeters. All right, anything smaller than 4 millimeters, then the border starts to look a little skinny, all right? It looks a little light, all right? So at least 4 millimeters. I've gone all the way to 5 millimeters, looks absolutely fine. And of course, the more external equipment outside of your embroidery machine, okay, which we're gonna talk about right now, okay, of course you have more options, all right? But for something very simple, very basic, all right, we're keeping it with the basic sand stitch. Now you can go up a level, and now we also have a different option when working with embroidery machines, and that is a decorative border stitch, which is also known as your faux marrow, your marrow patch, your decorative motif, okay? There's different names, different companies have different names. Okay, so this is kind of like a representation of the faux marrow, all right? Very popular right now, all right? I would say probably within the past 2 years, okay, a lot of embroiders have gone this route, especially with low quantity patches. Sometimes it's kind of hard to find marrow patches at very small quantities. So this might be the easiest and the quickest ways to go about going with faux marrow. Okay, so what it is, it's a decorative motif. So a decorative pattern, all right, that gives it a nice look on the border. I used to use the faux marrow a lot, all right, but I kind of went back to just keeping it very basic, just to keep stitch count low, all right, because your stitch count does go up with the faux marrow, and speed, okay, with basic satin run, okay, your speed is faster, low stitch count. That way you don't have to increase your price, all right? You definitely got to increase your price to your customer if you're going faux marrow because it takes a little longer. But appearance wise, okay, Sometimes you got to go with the faux Mero. Sometimes it gives it that extra oomph, right? If you're looking for that extra look, then you definitely want to go faux Mero. Okay, and then next, you have your actual Mero, right? You have your actual Mero patch. If you want to go with the original, right? The original Mero stitch, you're gonna have to buy a sewing machine that is specifically made for Mero. Shops that specialize in patches, okay, you're going to find a Mero machine in that embroidery shop. If you ever try to do that, okay, it's gonna take a lot of practice, a lot of try and error, so it's not something that you kind of pick up over the weekend and you're good to go, right? So that takes a lot of practice. If you're running just a one head, okay, you're probably in this area here. Okay, I just put this one here as an example just to show you that it is out there. Okay, but in reality, if you have a multi-needle machine, okay, most likely you're in this area here. All right, so you got to decide, do you want something very basic or do you want to give it a decorative look? This one, very quick decision, not much thinking involved in this decision. Is just, what do you want, one or the other? All right, let's go with decision number 3 when creating patches, and that is, what kind of materials do you want your patches on? So here at our shop, we're usually 99.99999% of the time using poly twill. So of course, you're gonna see poly twill, it has different names, but it all has like the same function, right? You're gonna hear it as tackle twill, you're gonna see it as different websites usually call them. Different vendors, different sites, usually they call it different names, all right? But for the most part, poly twill. And the good thing about polyester fabric is when you're finishing it, okay, when you give it the final finish, all right, it's very easy to hit it with the lighter, all right, just so all your stitches kind of come together. Of course, patches, right, patches could be done on any type of material. So on this decision, I'm going to keep it very basic, all right, I'm just going to say poly twill. Another fabric that is pretty popular, so felt, okay, felt is another popular one. We don't use felt too much. I've seen a lot of people do felt with it, a little lighter, a little thinner. Let's go with decision number 4, and this is a big one, okay? This can either be make or break. This could really determine how much time it takes for you to finish your patch. Decision number 4 is, how will you cut and how will you finish your patches? So here I have 4 different patches, just with 4 different examples. So of course, when we're talking about cutting, you could just do the traditional way. Okay, so here, just very basic. This is how we do it, okay? We do it very traditional, very basic. We just set up our patches, stitch everything out, and then cut everything at the very end. All right, so here I have other options that you can have, right? You can have lasers, like if you specialize in patches, if that's what you do, okay? Or if you want to have very unique, odd shapes, such as the one we talked about, decision number 1. Okay, you want to go with a laser. Okay, a laser is going to give you a nice clean cut. It's going to finish the edges of the patches, so you don't have to worry about fraying or anything. But a laser, once you set it up, you have everything ready to go. It might be a little bit more time consuming on the setup, okay, but on the long run, especially if you're doing long runs, you're going to save a lot of time. If this is something you want to kind of work and do quicker with the larger amount of quantities, okay, you kind of want to go here with the laser, especially if you're going with the oddball shapes. The reason why it works for us, the traditional, because we keep it very basic. All right, rectangles, squares, circles, okay, we keep our patches very basic, very clean. We have the water soluble stabilizer, okay, so I have it here. I do have a video, right, that you can link down in the playlist where we talk about the 3 different ways to create patches, all right, which I showed an example of the water soluble stabilizer. Very popular. Some people really like this because the cleanup, all right, very easy, very quick. All right, and then here we have a cutter. So you can do it applique style. You can use a cutter if you have a Graph Tech, or if you have maybe a Cricut. Also, I've seen people use a Cricut to do to pre-cut their patches. If you want to pre-cut your patches with a cutter, all right, that's another method, right? But you have to know in which category you're going to be at. So each one of these have a different amount of speed and how much time you can save or how much time you will add into your project. All right, and then let's go with finish. This kind of goes, when I'm talking about the finish, I'm talking about the backing. What is the back of your patch going to look like? Okay, so the finish of your patch is how is your patch going to look on the back side? okay? So it kind of goes with the cut. I put it together with the cut side because depending on what your finish is, that really is how you're going to cut it also. Sometimes they go hand in hand, okay? So depending how your finish is how you're going to cut it, or how you're going to cut it goes with your finish, all right? So really basic way to do it, all right? This is the way we do it. We put either an iron on, so customer could iron on that patch, or if they want to sew it, we also put a temporary adhesive, so it'll just stick temporarily while they're sewing it, okay? So these top two, okay, is the route that we go to. But of course, right, just with everything else, you do have other options that you can go with, all right? Some of these options, right, require more equipment and more training and more knowledge on this subject, all right? So you can do Velcro. So Velcro, very popular type of patch, all right? You gotta have certain equipment, certain technique to do that, okay? And then you could also just go with no backing, right? Just plain. They're just going to sew it on. You don't need to put no temporary adhesive, okay? So this one, of course, as basic as you can get, right? And of course, there may be other options, right? There may be other options that I'm missing, but these are just an example. But what I want you to know here is that by you knowing how the backside should look like, that should tell you how you're going to cut it. All right, so that's kind of guiding you on all your steps, okay? So a lot of times you can reverse engineer your patches, right? You kind of have an idea, how do I want my patches to look? And then you kind of you go in reverse engineer all those steps, and that's all part of the planning phase. So in order for your project to be profitable, okay, everything has to be planned out, okay? So I would suggest, right, going in reverse. So reverse engineering all this, how do you want your patches to look like, and work your way backwards. All right, let's go with decision number 5 when working on a patch project, and that is setting up your placement and sequence for your patches. All right, so here, okay, so a lot of times we don't really think about this little small step, all right? It can play a big role on how fast you can complete your embroidery project, all right? So what I'm talking about here, all right, let me show you an example of what I'm talking about, okay? So let's say these are your patches, right, on your hoop, okay? This is how the final outcome is supposed to look. Now, you got to decide as an embroiderer what's going to stitch first, okay? Do you want to stitch a full patch one at a time? For example, here we have 3 colors. Do you want to embroider blue, brown, red, and then move on to the next patch and do it all over again? Blue, brown, red, okay, all the way through, okay? Or do you want to do brown first, okay? So we could go brown, right? Do all the browns first, come back, do all the blues, right? That way you don't have that many color changes, right? So every time we're doing a color change, anytime we're doing a cut, that is all time that we're adding to this final project, right? And the more time it takes us to complete a project, the total profit goes down, right? So of course you want to finish it as soon as you can. So a lot of that all depends on your planning. What I would suggest is you want to keep color changes at a minimum, okay? So if you do have the opportunity to knock out all the browns in one shot, of course, that would be ideal, okay? And then you could do the blue next and then finalize it with the satin border, okay? Sometimes that might not work because certain items have to get stitched in at certain times, certain location, or maybe you might start having a registration problem, okay? It's a lot of this is all trial and error, okay? There is no one rule on how to do anything, okay? But at the very minimum, you want to make sure you can bring down the runtime as low as possible. Anything that you have control of, okay, if you can minimize the time it takes to stitch this out, okay, and sometimes you might tell yourself, you know what, I just lose 45 seconds right here, that's fine, I could, all right, but a lot of times, as you can see, 45 seconds can easily be multiplied by 18, right? So if you got 45 seconds, if you're losing 45 seconds on one patch, but you times that by 18, okay? And then you times that by, let's say you're doing 6 or 12 runs of this entire hoop, okay? That time could add up, okay? So those hours, that profit that you think you're making, okay, starts going down. All right, so this one here, I really haven't seen many people talk about the sequence, okay? But my experience with running patches, those little seconds that you save, is easily multiplied and then sometimes exponentially goes up in time. Okay, these were our 5 decisions we have to make to create patches, all right? Now, one thing I want to add, okay, so I have this book here that I highly recommend. So this is a graphic designer that I've been following forever, okay? I learned a lot of my Illustrator skills, okay, just following his Skillshare class. This book is by Draplin. It has a breakdown of his whole thought process when it comes time for creating merchandise. The reason why I like this book, because it has his concepts, right? His concepts from his brain to paper to the computer, all the way down to the patches, to the hats, to his stickers. A lot of those steps, okay, it deals with decisions we got to make. Eventually, we got to make a decision and we got to say, hey, we're going this way. Okay, you have to make decisions when you're creating projects. Sometimes you got to make decisions for your customer also. Sometimes they don't know the options we have. Okay, but the reason why I bring up this book, okay, because it shows his thought process from beginning to end. So if you want a good reading, okay, about the whole process, right, design process, even through different perspectives, I'll put this one down in the link so you could check it out. Highly recommend it. I went ahead and I put all the products that we use for our patches down in the description. Okay, as you can see, we keep it very basic. So if there's anything you want to add, any questions or anything, make sure you leave them down below in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.